Welcome to Uncensored Conservatism. This is episode number 53. We're going to take a final look at abortion today. Some common misconceptions, particularly regarding conservatives and contraception. So this is Bill Clinton, former president. He said that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. So this episode is about the rarity aspect of abortion. The abortion rate per 1,000 women who are of childbearing age, that's age 15 to 44, reached the low in about 2015. It showed a steady increase starting in around 2020 or something like that. Now, the large increase in the 1970s is attributable to Roe versus Wade, but the rate started to decrease steadily in the mid-1980s. Researchers are unsure why. Was it a personal decision not to get pregnant? Were people not having sex? Was it better sex education? Or was it more effective contraception? With the latter, I believe there's the serious misconceptions and disconnect about between Republicans and Democrats and their view on the subject. There's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to contraception, and we got to look at some of these methods first. So the most obvious and the only one that's 100% effective is abstinence. However, we do know that things happen in the heat of passion, and abstinence only is not a realistic version of birth control. Now, it may be in some cultures, but, honestly, it doesn't really occur. A related method is called the rhythm method, where sex is avoided around the time of ovulation, which is when an egg is released from the fallopian tube and goes in search of a viable sperm to fertilize it. I mean, that's the whole purpose of having fallopian tubes and eggs, is to find, a sperm to find it and to procreate. It isn't just there to swim around. These are known as the rhythm method and abstinence are called natural contraception. Among the artificial methods are a variety of spermicides which are inserted into the woman before sex. They basically trap sperm and kill it. These evil devils. Although there's now condoms for females, the most common ones are those used for males, and they've been around for thousands of years. They're about 90% effective. However, they can break and tear, and they're readily available at most pharmacies and generally cost somewhere under $10 for a pack. A related method is called coitus interruptus, which is the male withdrawals from the female before ejaculation, and therefore supposedly prevents pregnancy, but that's only 85% effective. Diaphragms and cervical caps are inserted by a gynecologist in a woman, and they block the sperm from reaching that pesky egg. But probably the most common means of birth control is the pill, which comes in various forms. I think this was introduced in about 1968 or 9. These pills work by stopping ovulation. Vaginal rings work similarly by releasing the same hormones found in birth control pills, and they also contain a spermicide. And an IUD, or intrauterine device, works by thickening the uterine lining, making it hard for the sperm to swim and blocking it from reaching the egg. Now, the left is big on scare tactics when it comes to conservatives and contraception. Well, this is from an article in USA Today. And it says the fight for reproductive justice is continuing at the federal and state levels, and the Republican Party is determined to prove its dedication to controlling women's bodies and birth control choices. The Republican Party made it clear last week that their archaic take on abortion also affects how they view birth control. So already it's archaic, and you can, whatever. Now, so this is from the Washington Post. If you're afraid contraception is on the GOP chopping block, you should be. In fact, the war on birth control is already here, and the Republicans' battle plan relies on the same tactic that paved the way for Roe versus Wade to fall. Disinformation. Okay. When it comes to disinformation, this is classic leftist projection because they want you to believe that we're headed for some kind of dystopian nightmare like that crap found on A Handmaid's Tale. And they will inevitably bring up this, Project 2025, and they'll tell you that Donald Trump is going to enact it, all 900 pages. It is, in effect, a conservative wish list that is not going to kill democracy like this knucklehead asserts. And these people have obviously fallen for the leftist disinformation. They probably have pink hair, too. And this one dressed up like a birth control pill to prove their point. The fact is, very few conservatives have a problem with birth control of any kind in the abstract. They likely also use birth control. Not every conservative demands abstinence-only birth control. The left will trot out the far extreme and portray it as the norm. As for those calling for abstinence only, well, it is the only 100% effective means of birth control. PolitiFact, not exactly a conservative outlet, had this to say about Project 2025 and contraception. The manual doesn't outright call for restricting standard contraceptive methods, and it goes on. The last part is important. Now, that previous USA Today and Washington Post article went on to say that Republicans blocked the Right to Contraception Act in the Senate in 2024, and they did. They also said that the law was meant to codify Griswold versus Connecticut, which was a 1964 Supreme Court case. This is Estelle Griswold. She's a feminist who worked for Planned Parenthood in Connecticut. She deliberately violated a state law regarding contraception, probably condoms since the pill had not come out yet. It is this decision where you will find the penumbras and emanations that justify Roe versus Wade, in Roe versus Wade, which was decided 9 years later. Regardless, Griswold the decision did not enshrine a right to contraception. It found a general privacy right in procreation decisions, but it had nothing. Contraception was the vehicle by which to get to that point. The left will tell you that Clarence Thomas in the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe, argued that Griswold should possibly be reconsidered. But his was a concurring opinion. This man, Samuel Alito, wrote the majority opinion in Dobbs, and his opinion is controlling. In it, he specifically states that the right to privacy still exists with regards to contraception. In other words, the feminist left is focusing on a non-controlling, concurring opinion by a single man to prove their point, or non-point, as the case may be. What Project 2025 does have an issue with is the so-called emergency contraception, or morning after pills. So if you have unprotected sex or condom breaks, one would take this pill within so many hours, probably 12 to 24, of actually having sex, and it will prevent pregnancy. But the very manufacturers of these pills also state that they are not a form of birth control. So let's go back to the PolitiFact, how they describe Project 2025, and we're going to look at the highlighted area. It says it does recommend restricting some, not all, emergency contraceptives from certain, not all, no-cost insurance coverage. If it isn't contraception, emergency or not, that basically they're saying that it should not be covered in certain no-cost insurance plans. Now, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines contraception as the deliberate prevention of conception or impregnation. Its alternate definition is birth control. So technically speaking, you prevent conception before the act of sexual intercourse, not after. A second objection of conservatives to the fakely or falsely named Right to Contraception Act is that it failed to take into account federal and state religious objections. There are groups and people out there who faithfully object to contraception of any type. Now, under Obamacare's contraception mandate, most birth control methods are paid for with minimal out-of-pocket expenses. But there's some serious beliefs involved here, folks. But most importantly, contraception is big business in the United States. $8.8 billion in 2023, and expected to rise through the end of the decade. A lot of that is the pill. So the question is, should a person with health insurance help pay for contraception of those of childbearing years? Should the people of childbearing years, if they want contraception covered in their plan, should they be able to pick and choose that? Sort of like those Liberty, Liberty, Liberty commercials. You pick and choose your insurance coverage, and it'd be covered 100% or for a little bit extra premium. Or, is an employer supposed to deny long-held beliefs and simply provide contraceptive coverage and jettison those beliefs? Another problem as concerns health insurance, with or without a mandate, with or without giving anybody a choice, is parental rights. Most minors are on their parents' health insurance plans. Most minors are also reluctant to tell their parents that they're sexually active. So how can we thread the needle to ensure we avoid pregnancy while also protecting parental rights? But the funny thing is, almost every state allows minors access to contraception without parental consent. Now, some require it with certain age ranges, like before the age of 14. I think one is 13. So minors, whether we conservatives and liberals like it or not, have access to contraception. Whether it's used correctly or not is a reflection on their level of maturity, in which case they shouldn't be having sex in the first place, and they should definitely should not be taking the morning after pill. Oddly, the claims that conservatives are against in vitro fertilization are weird. Now, this arises out of that Alabama kerfuffle and potential liability of these clinics and doctors should the frozen embryo die. In Alabama, the frozen embryo was defined as a person under their law. In a previous episode on abortion, I noted that whether we use the human life definition or person definition to assign rights to these, what the left would call a clump of cells, that gastrulation, which occurs at 14 days, should be the parameter. Now, for practical purposes, women don't know they're pregnant at 14 days after fertilization. They have to miss a menstrual period, and that's usually 28 days later. But for all practical purposes, it begins at conception. But we're going to say gastrulation for the sake of argument. But guess what? Most embryos are frozen at the blastocyst age, which is 5, 6, or 7. So it's really not an argument. So I don't say if, Joe Blow drops a frozen embryo in the lab, I don't consider that murder. Regardless, it makes zero sense that conservatives who are pro-life would oppose in vitro fertilization since it creates human life. It makes no difference whether through in vitro fertilization or through good old-fashioned sexual intercourse. Now, one area where I do disagree with my conservative brethren is with stem cell research. Even if we wipe out 92% of those for convenience abortions, there will still be abortions. I see no reason. It's never going to reach zero, okay? I see no reason why, in those cases, their cells cannot be used for stem cell research. I do have a problem with harvesting aborted babies for stem cell research, and which is why, except for those 8% that fall into the exception category, I oppose abortion. The bottom line is that adequate and informed sex education at an appropriate age can decrease the need for abortion. Okay? Now, sex education does not mean transgenderism, homosexuality, anal intercourse, oral sex, or anything like that. It should be informing people of the methods of birth control available to them and how one becomes pregnant and the ramifications of pregnancy. shouldn't have to deal with all that extraneous transgender, gay agenda stuff. Because we're never going to return to the days of Leave It to Beaver. I mean, even then, there were unwanted pregnancies. Granted, there may have been better moral standards in those days, thus weakened by these angry people and Roe versus Wade and his anti-life ruling. So, when it comes to conservatism, contraception, yes. Abortion, no, except under a few select exceptions. Like strong, intact families are the key to decreasing abortion in this country. Unfortunately, I believe the left has done a good job of weakening the family unit over time, and it's going to take decades to repair it. Your vote on November 5th may be the difference between whether this little guy existed or whether he ended up as medical waste. So make that decision wisely, folks. That's it. Have a great day. More pleasant tomorrow.